The first article today, that is October 3rd, 2015, the most important article it is related to the climate change. India has declared its targets. Now, let's try to understand certain terminology over here. So, India did not agree for the emission cuts, direct emission cuts. What is the term used over here is emissions intensity. What is the meaning of this? Now, for a unit of GDP growth, how much of the energy that has to be used? It has been discussed as emission intensity, or how much of the emissions that are being released into the atmosphere for a unit of GDP growth, that is emission intensity. Previously, India used the term energy intensity. For a unit of GDP growth, how much of energy is being used? That is what is described as energy intensity. It means with regard to emission intensities, so we are going to use less amount of carbon to achieve that particular target of growth. So this is said to be a responsible growth which we are going to involve ourselves. So what is the emission intensity target which it took for itself? Now it wants to achieve up to 35%. The word used is up to 35%. It means India did not agree for concrete results. So, and up to 35% by 2030 from 2005 levels. Now, how energy intensity and emissions intensity as on 2005 is determined is a question. India is going to determine its own emission intensities that are existing on 2005 and prepare a plan for 2030. So that means there are no external controls is one thing. And the second thing is India, it has to behave morally responsible for its own self rather than accountable to the international community as a whole. So the next point is India also has brought in 8 key goals with regard to this strategy. So what are the key goals? The first is sustainable lifestyles, which is India-centric or which is inherent in the Indian value system. The second is cleaner economic development. Third is reducing emission intensity as part of GDP, which I already have discussed. The fourth is increasing the share of non-fossil fuel based electricity. You know that in India, even by now, more than 300 million people, they do not have clean energy access. Or we can say it as the electricity access is missing to these people. So now India, to the new household or new connections of electricity, it want to increase the share of non-fossil fuel based electricity to at least to 40% by 2030. And next is enhancing the carbon sink. Now India is going to expand its forest cover so that 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of GHGs will be taken by that particular carbon sinks. And the next is adaptation. And next is mobilizing finances. And next, technology transfer, capacity building. So these are the various things, are 8 goals of India. Now, this is what is the total INDCs of India. So let's revise. India stressed on emission intensity, not the explicit emission cuts. And second is, along with this, India has given 8 key targets or goals for itself. So these goals are mostly value based. So in these circumstances, many of the international, many of the countries in the international community, they have targeted specifically India. Though these articles are not reflected in Hindu, there you can see them in other newspapers. And the next is, so let us see who are the big emitters. This can be a prelims question. China, US, European Union and India. The examiner can fool you saying that he will give you Germany and he tries to bring you 1, 2, 3, 4. So now India becomes third in position if you take individual country, and European Union is taken as a whole. India comes to fourth position. Now the major challenge of India with regard to this is a fund crunch. Now he can ask you, so which of the following are the key goals of the India's climate change plan? Then you can talk about all these 8 goals over here. So these things, try to have this particular picture for your future reference too. Now the same thing is also spoken by this particular editorial. Now what is the advantage, what are the opportunities India has? If you clearly see that we haven't developed completely our infrastructure, it means we have or we can plan our infrastructure in such a way that it will create minimal impact on the climate. So it will produce as minimal emissions as possible. So we can build our infrastructure which is environment friendly. And next is the financial mobilization is the major issue. Now if you read this year's economic survey, it has clearly said that India is moving from carbon subsidies to carbon taxes. Previously hydrocarbons were subsidized. Now hydrocarbons subsidy is been done away with, and carbon cess on coal, that is coal cess. And next is increased taxation on the hydrocarbons to compensate the reduction in the international oil prices. All this shows that Indian economy is shifting from carbon subsidy to carbon taxation. And third important thing is, remember this statement, a country is developed when the rich of the country takes the public transport for their commuting. So India has to simultaneously develop a strong public transport system for urban mobilization in the cities. So in this context, you take Singapore, New York, most of the cities, they use something called as the rapid mass transit, moving the people, not the vehicles, is the philosophy. India also has to bring in this particular thing where the individual vehicles can be heavily taxed. All this can be done to improve to reach to the India's targets. Now the next is India's foreign policy. India do not need a Monroe's doctrine. This is what is the thing. Now if you see India's response to Nepal, in previous 24th paper I have already covered this. So Nepal made its constitution, and a sovereign country through its constitution assembly, which is signed by 85% plus members of the 601 constitution assembly, is criticized by India, and India has given a 7 specific amendments to Nepal. So now it appears more India interfering with the aspects of the sovereignty of the other nation. So it is more of a big brotherhood attitude which India is nurturing in its South Asian neighborhood. Now 85% of the country, which also includes Madeshis, agreed to the constitution. Then India External Affairs Ministry said it took note of in Nepali constitution rather than using the word greeting of Nepali constitution, symbolically undermining the Nepali sovereignty. So if you understand, it has hurt even the people who are supporting India in Nepal. And the second thing is, an unofficial border blockade is being implemented between India and Nepal now. So the essential commodities are unable to reach to Nepal as it is a landlocked country. So in these circumstances, if you can remember the Bhutan issue, where India did not send exports of kerosene etc. to Bhutan, which has got into severe energy crisis over there. It is against to Mr. Tinglace becoming close to China, engaging with China. So this is one attitude with Bhutan, which has developed resentments against India in Bhutan. So similarly now, India's interference in Nepal, it has sent a message that India is interested to protect interests of certain sections of Nepali population who are of Indian origin, rather than upholding the Nepali aspirations as a whole. So this is what is the message which India has sent. So it means that India is going to develop animosity or else resentment with other groups in Nepal, where most of the Nepali elite comes from. So in this context, the ammunition is available for the anti-Indian forces to raise the raise of the people against India. So understand, here India has to be more an accommodative power in the South Asia rather than a big brother. The attitude of India has gone to such an extent that Indian anti-Indianism in Nepal became Nepali nationalism with certain sections now. So India has to be careful. It is not only with India. So with Bengal, with Bangladesh, now one is land boundary agreement has sent some good waters into Bangladesh. But however, the delay in Teesta water deal, and next with the hot pursuit and the post events, the chest thumping followed by hot pursuit in Myanmar, which is a regular event from 1960s. This government unnecessarily brought open these particular issues. And the Pakistani response that Pakistan is not Myanmar. So all this has ashamed the Myanmar, which is not willing to cooperate with India anymore. In spite of India's repeated requests, it is not interested to hand over Mr. Kaplong, who is responsible for this Manipur's ambush. So in these circumstances, the small countries are being, I'll use the word, pushed towards China by India's attitude. So India cannot be America. America's diplomacy style will not apply to India. So in diplomacy, what is more important is persuasion, not force. So it means, so if you see America, which has used force into diplomacy, it is trying to reconcile with the changing times now. India cannot afford to do that when the world is moving away from that. And next is, let's not repeat the Copenhagen. You know that the Copenhagen in Denmark, in 2000, it wants to frame the rules for post-2012 with regard to the emission targets. It has failed because of developed countries and developing countries unable to balance their national interests. Now the blame was on India and China. Reason being they did not agree to be or agree for any emission cuts. And now in these circumstances, we are going to the Paris conference. The situation has definitely changed. Now China is agreeing for clear emission cuts. It is because of the China-USA agreement. And the next is, with regard to Scandinavian countries, let us see this way. The climate change is creating new commercial opportunities for the Scandinavian countries, including Russia too. Now understand these commercial opportunities, how they have to be utilized by the world is one question. And the second is Arctic ice melt. It is going to provide for new resources of oil and gas. Already if you observe, though Norway, Sweden, they talk about clean energies which they are adopting, most of the revenue of these countries also comes from oil and gas exports. So the wealth which is created in Norway and Sweden is also producing pollution in other geographies. How it has to be handled. And if you see, Arctic Council made India and China as observers to sensitize them to the issues of melting of ice, but they are not showing deeper interest. So that's why a mutually accommodative policy and developmental orientation of the developed nations that can provide for a balance between the interests of developed and developing nations in Paris. And the next is, to counter China, Navy of India expands. Now, if you observe, the China is more and more visible in Indian Ocean, Chinese Navy. So, in these circumstances, India is also building new partnerships to counter the assertive China in Indian Ocean. So, the words which are used in this article are assertive China, aggressive India. So, India is recently INS Sahyadri, it has entered into Vietnam waters, where South China Sea was a disputed territory, and it is on its way to Japan to conduct common exercises between these two navies. And simultaneously, India also had security defense cooperation agreement with Australia. And Admiral, what is his name? Dovan, he also visited Australia, and also is participating in Sea Power Conference. All these are active engagement of India to build partnerships to protect its high seas. Till date, India is undisputedly the maritime power in the Indian Ocean. The new challenge which is flowing to it from China is a bit of concern to us. So added to that, there is one more article I failed to pick up this thing. Air quality index, ambient air quality index. In this particulate matter, if you see, more the particulate matter which is smaller in size, it will be of great concern for health disorders. Now particulate matter less than 2.5 microns, it is very high in Indian cities. So as per the WHO standards, particulate matter less than 10 microns, it should not be greater than 10 parts per cubic meter or something. Now in India, if you see, it is around 151 in Delhi. So it means all the Indian citizens are most uninhabitable. So in these circumstances, the Central Pollution Control Board, instead of imposing or implementing the strict norms, it is rejecting these reports. So understand, particulate matter less than 2.5 microns is more than 15 times, then it is a constant health hazard. So all the Western countries advised their ambassadors about the air purifiers, and also they are making policies not to give long tenures for their embassy people in New Delhi. So this shows the concern of air pollution in New Delhi. And these are the issues related to this. Thank you very much.